Call security. He does not belong here. The woman did not lower her voice. In fact, she seemed to want everyone around the pool to hear it. Conversations stopped. Children paused in the water. A few residents looked up from their lounge chairs. The bright summer afternoon suddenly felt much quieter than before. Isaiah Brooks sat alone beneath a large umbrella near the edge of the community pool. At 68 years old, he carried himself with the calm confidence of someone who no longer felt the need to prove anything to anyone. A paperback book rested open in his lap. Beside him sat a half-finished bottle of water and a neatly folded towel. He had arrived less than 20 minutes earlier. He planned to spend the afternoon reading. Instead, dozens of eyes were now fixed on him. Across the pool deck stood Karen Whitfield. Designer sunglasses rested on top of her blonde hair. She wore an expensive cover-up and carried the kind of authority that came from believing she represented the community. As a member of the neighborhood board, she was accustomed to people listening when she spoke. And at that moment, she looked directly at Isaiah as though she had already reached a verdict. "I have never seen him here before," she announced. "Can somebody check whether he is supposed to be here?" The words settled over the pool like a shadow. Isaiah slowly placed a bookmark between the pages of his novel and closed it. He looked up at Karen. His expression remained calm. Not angry. Not embarrassed. Just tired. Tired in the way someone becomes after experiencing the same assumptions too many times throughout a lifetime. A young security officer standing near the clubhouse entrance hesitated before walking toward him. The officer looked uncomfortable. Barely older than 25. He seemed caught between doing his job and recognizing that something about the situation felt wrong. "Sir," he said politely, "would you mind showing your resident pass?" Isaiah nodded. "Not at all." He reached into his pocket and removed a laminated card. The officer examined it. Everything appeared valid, current, active. Isaiah was exactly where he had every right to be. "Thank you, sir," the officer said. "Everything checks out." That should have ended the matter. It did not. Karen folded her arms. "That does not prove anything." Several residents exchanged awkward glances. The officer blinked. "Ma'am." Karen gestured toward Isaiah. "I have lived here for 7 years. I know my neighbors." The implication was clear. If she did not recognize him, then somehow he did not belong. Isaiah slowly stood. The afternoon sunlight reflected across the surface of the water behind him. For a brief moment, memories flickered through his mind. Not of today. Not of this confrontation. Older memories. Decades older. Dirt roads. Construction equipment. Concrete trucks. Empty land stretching toward the horizon. He could almost smell fresh lumber baking beneath the summer heat. Almost hear the sound of hammers and machinery. Then the memories disappeared as quickly as they came. "I am sorry you do not recognize me," Isaiah said quietly. "But that does not make me a stranger." Karen opened her mouth to respond, but a small voice interrupted her. A little boy standing nearby tugged on his mother's sleeve. "Mom!" he whispered loudly enough for several people to hear. Why are they bothering him? No one answered immediately. The question seemed to linger in the air. Isaiah glanced toward the child and offered a gentle smile. Then he picked up his book, his towel, and his water bottle. He could have argued. He could have stayed. Instead, he calmly turned and began walking toward the clubhouse. As he passed a decorative stone monument near the pool entrance, something made him stop. Mounted on the monument was a bronze plaque celebrating the history of the neighborhood. Names covered its surface. Developers. Investors. Community leaders. Isaiah stared at it for several seconds. His eyes moved slowly from one line to the next. Then a faint sadness crossed his face. Because among all those names one was missing. And nobody standing beside that pool had any idea why. Isaiah Brooks walked slowly toward the clubhouse, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the pool deck. He kept his hands relaxed at his sides, his posture steady, as if the eyes of dozens of residents were simply background noise. Karen Whitfield stood near the entrance, her sunglasses slipping slightly down her nose as she observed him. Inside, the pool area buzzed with whispers and soft murmurs. Children splashed cautiously in the water, their attention divided between play and the unfolding scene. Isaiah paused near the decorative monument, his dark eyes lingering on the bronze plaque, listing the names of developers, investors, and neighborhood contributors. The plaque gleamed in the sunlight, but his name was not on it. He traced his fingers lightly along the edge, remembering the day he had poured concrete here, supervised the framing of houses, and planned the layout of streets decades ago. Each detail came back vividly. The smell of sawdust, the sound of hammers striking nails, the chatter of workers, the sun beating down on their backs, the sweat and effort that built this community from the ground up. Meanwhile, Karen whispered to a nearby neighbor, a hint of condescension in her voice, unaware of the truth behind Isaiah's presence. Isaiah sighed softly and kept moving, heading toward the clubhouse entrance. The security officer stepped aside politely, still uncertain how to act beyond verifying his credentials. Inside, sunlight streamed through large windows, illuminating polished floors and neatly arranged lounge chairs. Isaiah walked past, noticing the subtle reactions of those around him. Furtive glances, hesitant nods, curious expressions, some tinged with discomfort. He reached a table displaying historical photographs and community newsletters dating back decades. He picked up an old newsletter and let his fingers trace the faded print, recalling the milestones of Willow Creek Estates, the groundbreaking ceremonies, the ribbon cuttings, and his own role in coordinating these events. Each memory grounded him in the reality that while many had forgotten, he had not. The room was quiet now, almost reverent, as a few residents looked up from their conversations. Isaiah's calm demeanor and measured steps projected an unspoken dignity that contrasted sharply with Karen's nervous energy and whispered critiques. For a moment, the weight of history seemed to settle over the entire space. He glanced once more at the pool through the wide windows, noticing children playing and neighbors lounging, and he felt the subtle irony of the moment. The same community that had dismissed him as an outsider decades later depended on the foundation he had laid. He placed the newsletter carefully back on the table, turned toward the exit, and walked toward the reception area to retrieve a box of old photographs he had brought with him. Each image told a story of labor, persistence, and the quiet heroism of ordinary people who had built something lasting. His expression was serene, reflective, and slightly wistful, a man aware of both the injustice of assumptions and the enduring truth of his contributions, moving with purpose, yet without confrontation, through a room full of people who had yet to understand the depth of his presence and the history behind the place they called home. Isaiah carried the box of photographs to a quiet corner of the clubhouse where a pair of large windows overlooked the pool. Outside, the afternoon continued as though nothing unusual had happened. Children laughed. Water sparkled beneath the sun. Lounge chairs remained occupied. Yet for Isaiah, the day had shifted in a way he could feel but could not fully explain. He placed the box on a table and carefully removed the lid. Inside were dozens of photographs protected by clear sleeves, their edges softened by time. Some showed construction crews standing beside unfinished streets. Others captured rows of wooden frames before houses ever existed. There were pictures of muddy fields, bulldozers, cement mixers, and teams of workers smiling through exhaustion. Isaiah picked up one image and studied it quietly. A younger version of himself stood near the entrance of what would eventually become the community recreation center. His hard hat sat crooked on his head. His shirt was stained with dust. Behind him stretched empty land where hundreds of families now lived. The memory brought a faint smile to his face. Across the room, a volunteer preparing materials for an upcoming neighborhood anniversary event noticed the photographs. The woman, whose name tag read Linda, approached with curiosity. "Those are incredible," she said. Isaiah looked up. "They are old." Linda laughed softly. "Old does not mean unimportant." She carefully examined one of the photographs. "Where did these come from?" Isaiah hesitated for a moment. "I took most of them myself." Linda blinked. "You did?" He nodded. 40 years ago, there was not much here except dirt and possibility. Her expression changed immediately. "Wait, you worked on the original development?" Isaiah smiled. "Something like that." Before she could ask another question, voices echoed from the hallway. Several committee members entered carrying folders and decorations for the anniversary celebration. The event was only a few weeks away, and preparations had already begun. Linda picked up another photograph. You should show these to the planning committee. Isaiah glanced toward the hallway. I am not sure they would be interested. Trust me, she said. They would. Meanwhile, outside near the pool, Karen Whitfield remained irritated by the encounter earlier that afternoon. She sat beneath a shaded umbrella speaking with another board member. Something about that situation felt strange, she said. I still think there is more to the story. Her companion shrugged. The security officer checked his credentials. Karen crossed her arms. That is not what I mean. Yet she could not explain exactly what bothered her. Perhaps it was Isaiah's calm reaction. Perhaps it was the way he seemed completely unaffected by her accusations. Or perhaps it was the uncomfortable feeling that she had overlooked something important. Back inside the clubhouse, Linda carried several photographs to a nearby conference table, where committee members were reviewing historical materials. One image immediately caught everyone's attention. A man with silver hair adjusted his glasses and leaned closer. Where did you find this? He asked. Linda pointed toward Isaiah. The room grew noticeably quieter. Several people studied the photograph. It showed a construction team standing beside a freshly poured foundation. At the center stood Isaiah Brooks. Beneath the image written in faded marker was a date from more than 4 decades earlier. The silver-haired man stared at the picture for several seconds before looking toward Isaiah again. A look of recognition slowly crossed his face. As afternoon sunlight filled the room, a question began forming in his mind. It was the same question that would soon spread throughout the entire neighborhood. If Isaiah Brooks had been there from the beginning, why did so few people seem to know his story? The silver-haired man continued staring at the photograph long after everyone else had moved on to other tasks. Finally, he stood from his chair and walked slowly toward Isaiah. The room remained busy around them. Volunteers arranged decorations. Committee members discussed schedules. Boxes of old records sat stacked against the wall. Yet something about the photograph had clearly unsettled him. Isaiah noticed the man approaching and offered a polite nod. Can I help you? The man removed his glasses. My name is Richard Bennett. His voice sounded hesitant. I think I know who you are. Isaiah smiled faintly. That would make one of us. Richard laughed softly before glancing down at the photograph again. My father worked on the original planning committee. Isaiah's expression changed slightly. Bennett Construction? Richard looked surprised. You remember that? I remember most of the people who were there. For several seconds neither man spoke. Then Richard lowered his voice. You were not just a worker, were you? Isaiah looked through the clubhouse windows toward the neighborhood beyond. Rows of homes stretched beneath the afternoon sun. Streets lined with mature trees. Parks. Sidewalks. Families. Things that had not existed when he first arrived. No, he said quietly. I was not. Before Richard could ask another question, Linda appeared carrying another stack of photographs. She placed them on the table. Several committee members immediately gathered around. One photograph showed the neighborhood entrance under construction. Another revealed the community center before the roof had been installed. A third displayed workers standing beside the newly completed swimming pool decades earlier. The same swimming pool where Isaiah had been questioned only hours before. Richard picked up the pool photograph. Wait. His eyes narrowed. That is you again. Linda leaned closer. He is in almost every picture. More people gathered around. Curiosity spread quickly. Someone pointed toward Isaiah. Another volunteer began flipping through additional photographs. With each image the same face appeared. Sometimes carrying blueprints. Sometimes standing beside equipment. Sometimes surrounded by crews. Always present. Always working. Across the neighborhood, Karen Whitfield was heading home when she received a text message from another board member. Have you seen the photographs in the clubhouse? She frowned. A few seconds later, another message arrived. Apparently that man from the pool helped build Willow Creek. Karen rolled her eyes. People loved exaggerating stories. Yet something about the message bothered her enough that she turned her car around and drove back toward the clubhouse. Meanwhile, inside, Richard continued examining the photographs. Why have I never seen these before? He asked. Linda shrugged. Most were sitting in storage. Isaiah remained quiet. He had never been interested in recognition. For decades he had simply lived his life, raised a family, worked hard, retired. Yet watching the photographs emerge after so many years stirred emotions he could not fully describe. Some memories felt warm, others felt painful, because he remembered more than construction projects. He remembered promises. Promises made during meetings and ceremonies. Promises that certain people would never be forgotten. As sunlight shifted across the room, Isaiah noticed something tucked inside one of the boxes. A large folder labeled Historical Recognition Committee. His eyes lingered on the words. A strange feeling settled in his chest. Something about that folder felt important. Important enough that he slowly reached toward it. Across the room, Richard noticed the movement. So did Linda. Neither realized that inside that aging folder might be the first clue explaining why Isaiah Brooks appeared in every photograph from the neighborhood's beginning. Yet somehow, nowhere in its official history, Isaiah opened the aging folder labeled Historical Recognition Committee and carefully began sorting through its contents. Each sheet contained lists of names, minutes from old meetings, hand-drawn maps of the neighborhood, and typed reports on various construction projects spanning decades. He noticed with a mix of nostalgia and mild frustration that his own name rarely appeared where it belonged, while the contributions of others were meticulously recorded. Sitting down at the conference table, he spread the documents around him like puzzle pieces, allowing the images and notes to fall into place. Across the room, Richard Bennett watched quietly, understanding more with each passing moment. Linda leaned closer to observe a photograph showing the completed community pool, Isaiah at its center, supervising workers while sunlight gleamed off the freshly poured concrete. "I cannot believe these were tucked away for so long," Linda whispered. Isaiah nodded slowly, his expression calm yet tinged with the weariness of decades of unacknowledged work. "Recognition has never been my goal," he replied softly. Outside, the community continued their daily routines, unaware of the history unfolding within the clubhouse walls. Karen Whitfield arrived back at the clubhouse, her heels clicking on the polished floors, and immediately noticed the growing circle of attention around the table. Curiosity mingled with apprehension in her eyes. Isaiah looked up from a set of photographs depicting streets before they were paved, homes before roofs were raised, and the young families who had first moved into the newly built properties. Every image reinforced the reality that he had been present, actively shaping this community from its inception. Richard leaned in, pointing to a detailed map showing the neighborhood layout, streets, and infrastructure plans. "This confirms it," he murmured, glancing toward Isaiah with newfound respect. Isaiah allowed himself a faint, measured smile, acknowledging the unspoken recognition without claiming glory. He understood that true acknowledgement often arrived quietly, and that the lives shaped and homes built were reward enough. Meanwhile, Karen circled the room, her steps hesitant as she glimpsed photographs that placed Isaiah at the center of pivotal construction moments she had never known about. A subtle shift in her posture betrayed a dawning awareness that her previous assumptions had been misguided. Isaiah, noting her presence, maintained his steady demeanor, choosing not to confront or admonish. Instead, he continued arranging documents, allowing the images to tell their story. By late afternoon, the room had transformed into a small exhibition of forgotten history. Volunteers, committee members, and neighbors who had wandered in began to murmur with fascination and recognition. Each photograph, each handwritten note, each official record quietly conveyed the truth of Isaiah Brooks' decades-long contribution to the very neighborhood that had momentarily doubted his presence. Outside, the sunlight softened, casting long golden rays across the pool deck. Inside, in that quiet corner of the clubhouse, the weight of time and the persistence of one man's efforts finally began to resonate with everyone who paused to see and listen, creating an atmosphere charged with revelation, reflection, and the first hints of respect that had long been overdue. Isaiah carefully packed the photographs and documents back into the box, his movements deliberate and measured, ensuring each image remained protected, while Richard Bennett and Linda watched quietly, sensing the gravity of what had just unfolded. The room, once bustling with activity, had settled into a contemplative silence, punctuated only by the faint rustling of paper and the distant laughter of children by the pool outside. Sunlight streaming through the large windows and illuminating the dust particles dancing in the air, Isaiah's mind wandered briefly to the memories these photographs evoked. The long days coordinating construction crews, the first pour of concrete, the installation of streetlights, the layout of parks and sidewalks, all painstakingly designed and executed by hands that had not been celebrated, yet were the foundation of the community now thriving outside. He felt the quiet pride that comes from knowing a lifetime of work had not been wasted, that homes stood, families flourished, and streets bore the imprint of careful planning. Richard spoke softly, breaking the stillness. "It is incredible how much you did," and Isaiah simply nodded, acknowledging the unspoken recognition without arrogance, his calm presence conveying dignity earned through decades of effort. While Linda arranged several photographs on the table for the committee members to view, each image telling its own story of perseverance, teamwork, and the evolution of the neighborhood from bare land to a vibrant community. Outside, Karen Whitfield returned once more, her steps hesitant as she approached the clubhouse, observing from a distance the gathering around Isaiah and the displayed photographs, her previous certainty now tempered by the subtle awareness that her assumptions had been incomplete. Yet she remained silent, curious, and slightly unsettled by the realization that the man she had dismissed so casually hours before was deeply woven into the very fabric of Willow Creek. Isaiah, carrying the box to a side table, allowed himself a brief glance toward the pool, where families played and neighbors chatted, recognizing that his work had quietly endured through time, unseen yet foundational, and that the acknowledgement beginning to ripple through the room was a reflection of truth finally reaching the community. He arranged the documents with care, the soft click of sleeves and folders punctuating the room, while Richard and Linda shared quiet, appreciative glances, understanding that this moment marked the first step in correcting a decades-long oversight, and that the story of Isaiah Brooks, the man who helped build the neighborhood, was now emerging with clarity, integrity, and the calm satisfaction of one who has witnessed the fruits of his labor survive, prosper, and at long last, be recognized by those who had once doubted him, the golden afternoon light casting a warm glow over faces, photographs, and the quiet dignity of a man whose presence had always belonged. The next morning arrived with a softness that felt almost deceptive. Sunlight spilled across Willow Creek, estates illuminating the sidewalks, gardens, and neatly trimmed lawns that residents took pride in every day. Yet beneath the peaceful appearance of the neighborhood, something had begun to change. Word about the photographs had spread faster than anyone expected. By breakfast, residents were discussing Isaiah Brooks in online community groups, over coffee, and during morning walks. Questions replaced assumptions. Curiosity replaced certainty. Inside the clubhouse, Linda unlocked the doors earlier than usual. The photographs remained arranged on display tables exactly where they had been left the evening before. Several residents arrived within minutes. Some came because they loved local history. Others came because they wanted to see whether the stories circulating around the neighborhood were true. Richard Bennett stood near the entrance reviewing additional records he had brought from home. Old binders, planning notes, meeting summaries, decades of forgotten paperwork. As more people entered, the atmosphere felt less like a committee meeting, and more like a community discovering part of its own identity. Isaiah arrived shortly after 10 o'clock carrying a small leather folder. He seemed surprised by the growing crowd. A few people greeted him warmly. Others offered respectful nods. The contrast with the previous afternoon was impossible to ignore. Isaiah acknowledged everyone with quiet courtesy before setting the folder on a nearby table. Linda smiled. "You might be the most popular person in Willow Creek today." Isaiah laughed softly. That would be a first. The crowd chuckled with him. The tension that had surrounded him at the pool seemed distant now, though not forgotten. Richard opened one of the old binders and carefully removed several documents. "I found something last night," he announced. Conversations gradually quieted. He placed the papers beneath the overhead lights. They were official planning records from more than 40 years earlier. Several names appeared repeatedly throughout the documents. Developers, engineers, contractors. Then someone noticed another name. Isaiah Brooks. Not once. Not twice. Again and again. Residents leaned closer. The record showed him supervising infrastructure projects, coordinating construction schedules, and overseeing critical phases of development. One document listed him as the lead field coordinator for multiple sections of the community. Another praised his problem-solving skills during a major construction delay. A murmur moved through the room. Isaiah stood quietly as people read. He did not seem eager to defend himself or prove a point. The documents spoke clearly enough on their own. Meanwhile, Karen Whitfield sat alone at her kitchen table several streets away. A printed copy of the community newsletter lay beside her coffee cup. For the first time, she studied the photographs carefully. The same face appeared over and over. Isaiah standing beside construction crews. Isaiah reviewing plans. Isaiah helping shape the neighborhood she had proudly called home for years. A growing discomfort settled in her chest. She remembered every assumption she had made at the pool. Every word. Every look. None of it felt defensible anymore. Back at the clubhouse, Richard uncovered another document near the bottom of the binder. His expression changed immediately. "This cannot be right," he whispered. Linda looked over his shoulder. The page contained minutes from a historical recognition meeting, held nearly 20 years earlier. Several names had been nominated for permanent acknowledgement within the community. One nomination stood out: Isaiah Brooks. The recommendation had been unanimous. Yet beside the entry appeared a handwritten note: "Recognition postponed." No explanation followed. The room became silent. For the first time, the mystery was no longer whether Isaiah had helped build Willow Creek. The evidence made that undeniable. The new question was far more troubling. If everyone once agreed he deserved recognition, who decided he would be forgotten instead? By late morning, the clubhouse had transformed into a quiet hub of revelation and reflection. Isaiah Brooks carefully placed the remaining historical documents beside the photographs already displayed on the large conference table, his fingers brushing the edges with deliberate care. Each photograph seemed to radiate the memory of labor, of hands laying brick and timber, of streets emerging from empty dirt paths into thriving lanes lined with homes. Richard Bennett stood nearby, his gaze fixed on a single photograph depicting Isaiah directing a crew during the construction of the Central Park, the sun glinting off scaffolding and freshly poured concrete. "I had no idea this man was everywhere," Richard murmured to Linda, who nodded, her eyes wide with understanding and the faintest trace of awe. Residents had begun trickling in, drawn by curiosity and whispered accounts of the man who had been overlooked for decades. They gathered around the table, murmuring among themselves, pointing to images that clearly showed Isaiah at critical junctures of the neighborhood's development. Karen Whitfield arrived shortly thereafter, her steps hesitant, her usual confident air slightly diminished as she approached the growing crowd. She observed Isaiah quietly arranging documents, his calm presence unshaken by the attention, the soft light from the tall windows casting highlights across his hair and face, revealing lines etched by years of work and dedication. Conversations hushed as she approached, the whispers of discovery spreading like ripples across a still pond. A resident spoke softly. "He built this place, all of it," gesturing toward the images and the binder of records. The realization struck the crowd with quiet force, replacing assumptions with recognition. Karen stared at the collection before her, her mind replaying the poolside confrontation, the security call, and the dismissive gestures she had made. Now, with evidence of Isaiah's contributions laid bare, the gravity of her error settled in. She watched as children played outside, unaware of the history now being revealed within the walls of the clubhouse, and saw that the streets they ran upon, the benches they rested on, the pool they swam in, had all been part of Isaiah's careful oversight decades earlier. Isaiah, sensing the shift in awareness, did not speak or demand acknowledgement. He continued arranging photographs and documents with quiet dignity, allowing the images to narrate their own story. The room, filled with murmurs of recognition, respect, and admiration, a collective understanding of the man's unseen labor beginning to take hold. Richard pointed to a blueprint showing the earliest planning of the neighborhood, the streets winding around empty plots of land, and the residents leaned closer, connecting the past with the present. Karen Whitfield finally stepped forward, her expression a mixture of remorse and newfound respect, observing the man she had once questioned so casually and realizing for the first time the depth of his presence in the community's foundation. Isaiah's gaze remained steady, composed, and unassuming, his calm demeanor a testament to decades of quiet contribution, and as afternoon sunlight streamed through the windows, it illuminated the room and the faces of those gathered, marking the moment when the truth of Isaiah Brooks' essential role in the neighborhood became undeniably clear, uniting history, memory, and community recognition in a single, resonant realization. As the afternoon slowly drifted toward evening, the atmosphere inside the clubhouse became heavier with every new discovery. Residents who had entered out of curiosity now lingered with genuine interest. Some sat quietly studying photographs. Others examined old planning documents spread across the conference tables. The story unfolding before them was no longer about a misunderstanding at the pool. It had become something much larger. Richard Bennett remained focused on the records from the Historical Recognition Committee. The handwritten note beside Isaiah's nomination continued to bother him. Recognition postponed. No explanation. No follow-up. No vote recorded afterward. It felt incomplete. Almost intentional. He carefully searched through additional binders while Linda organized the photographs into chronological order. Isaiah sat near the window overlooking the neighborhood. Golden sunlight reflected off the streets he had helped design decades earlier. Children rode bicycles along sidewalks that once existed only on blueprints. Families walked dogs through parks that had once been empty fields. The view brought both pride and sadness. Pride because the community had flourished. Sadness because so much history had quietly disappeared. A sudden voice interrupted his thoughts. "Mr. Brooks." Isaiah looked up. Standing nearby was the same young security officer from the pool. The young man shifted awkwardly. "I wanted to apologize." Several people glanced toward them. The officer cleared his throat. "I know I was doing my job, but after everything I learned today." He paused. "I am sorry." Isaiah offered a warm smile. "You were respectful." The officer seemed relieved. "Still, you deserved better." Isaiah nodded gently. "Thank you." The brief exchange carried more sincerity than either expected. Across the room, Karen Whitfield watched quietly. She had barely spoken for over an hour. Normally, she was one of the most vocal people in any community meeting. Today was different. Every photograph she examined seemed to deepen her discomfort. Every document contradicted the assumptions she had made. She picked up a faded image showing Isaiah standing beside a group of workers during the construction of the community pool. The date printed on the back stopped her cold. It had been taken nearly 20 years before she graduated college. Long before she had ever heard of Willow Creek. Long before she arrived and began acting as though she understood its history. Meanwhile, Richard suddenly straightened in his chair. "I found something." Conversations immediately quieted. He carefully removed a yellowing folder hidden between two larger binders. Dust rose into the sunlight as he opened it. Inside were letters. Meeting correspondence. Internal memoranda. Richard skimmed the pages before stopping abruptly. Linda leaned closer. "What is it?" Richard looked stunned. "This folder explains what happened." Residents gathered around. Even Karen stepped forward. Richard held up a document dated 19 years earlier. It referenced the Recognition Committee and Isaiah's nomination. The room became silent as he read. According to the records, plans had been approved to honor several founding contributors during the community's 20th anniversary celebration. Isaiah's name appeared prominently on the list. Then Richard turned to the next page. His expression darkened. A last-minute leadership change had occurred before the ceremony. New committee members revised the final recognition list. Several names remained. One was removed. Isaiah Brooks. No reason was officially recorded. The room sat in stunned silence. Isaiah himself looked surprised. For decades he had assumed the recognition simply never happened. He never knew his name had actually been approved. Outside the clubhouse windows, the evening sun dipped lower across the neighborhood. Inside, a troubling realization settled over everyone present. Isaiah had not been forgotten by accident. Somewhere along the way, someone had made a deliberate choice. And for the first time, the community began asking not who Isaiah Brooks was, but why his story had been erased. The discovery changed everything. By the following morning, the conversation had spread beyond the clubhouse and into every corner of Willow Creek Estates. Residents who had never attended a committee meeting suddenly wanted answers. Neighbors who barely glanced at historical displays now stopped to read every document posted on the community bulletin board. The story was no longer a rumor. It was a question waiting for an explanation. Why had Isaiah Brooks been removed from the official record after being approved for recognition? Inside the clubhouse, preparations for the upcoming neighborhood anniversary celebration continued, but the atmosphere felt different now. What had once been a routine community event was quickly becoming something far more significant. Richard Bennett arrived carrying additional boxes from his father's storage room. Linda greeted him at the door. Together they spent the morning sorting through decades of correspondence, searching for anything that might explain the missing recognition. Isaiah sat quietly near the window, watching sunlight spill across the park outside. Children chased one another across grass that had once been an empty construction site. The sight brought a faint smile to his face. Despite everything that had happened, he felt no anger, only curiosity. Karen Whitfield arrived shortly before noon. Unlike previous visits, she did not stay near the doorway. She walked directly toward Isaiah. Several residents noticed immediately. The room seemed to grow quieter as she approached. For a brief moment neither spoke. Karen looked uncomfortable, as though searching for words she had never expected to say. Finally she took a slow breath. "I owe you an apology." Isaiah looked at her calmly. Karen glanced down before continuing. What happened at the pool was wrong. The admission hung in the air. Residents nearby pretended not to listen, though everyone clearly heard every word. Karen continued. "I made assumptions about you. I should not have." Isaiah remained silent for a moment. Then he nodded gently. "Thank you for saying that." There was no bitterness in his voice, no desire to embarrass her. The simplicity of his response seemed to surprise her. Before either could say more, Richard called out from across the room. "Everyone needs to see this." People gathered around another stack of records. Richard carefully unfolded a large document. It was an early anniversary planning proposal from nearly 20 years earlier. Attached to it was a draft program for the celebration. Several names appeared under a section titled Founding Contributors. Isaiah Brooks was listed first. A murmur spread through the crowd. Then Richard revealed something even more surprising. Clipped behind the program was a handwritten letter from a former committee chairperson. The letter referenced concerns about how certain contributors might be perceived during public recognition. The wording was cautious, indirect, yet the implication felt unmistakable. The room fell silent as residents read the faded page. Nobody said the word out loud, but everyone understood what the letter suggested. Some people had been comfortable celebrating the neighborhood. They had been less comfortable celebrating everyone who built it. Karen slowly lowered the document. Her face reflected genuine regret. Isaiah stood quietly beside the table. The sunlight from the windows illuminated the photographs surrounding him. Decades earlier, he had helped transform open land into a thriving community. Now, years later, the truth was finally emerging from storage boxes and forgotten folders. As afternoon light filled the clubhouse, the anniversary committee made a unanimous decision. The upcoming celebration would no longer proceed as originally planned. Before anything else happened, Willow Creek Estates would tell the complete story. And for the first time in decades, Isaiah Brooks' name would finally be impossible to ignore. The days leading up to the anniversary celebration were filled with a quiet anticipation that reverberated through Willow Creek Estates. Residents visited the clubhouse repeatedly, examining photographs and documents with increasing reverence, while the story of Isaiah Brooks unfolded piece by piece. Committee members, volunteers, and curious neighbors now spoke in hushed tones, connecting details from old records with memories and anecdotes shared by longtime residents. Every photograph, every binder page, every handwritten note added another layer to the narrative of Isaiah's decades-long contribution. The historical importance of his presence became undeniably clear. Karen Whitfield, who had once confronted him at the pool, now approached the display cautiously, her usual assertiveness tempered by humility. Her eyes lingered on images showing Isaiah coordinating construction crews, inspecting foundations, and supervising the placement of every street sign and lamp post. The more she observed, the more apparent it became that Isaiah Brooks had not merely participated in the development of the neighborhood. He had orchestrated key elements of it, ensuring that each street, park, and communal space reflected careful planning and consideration. Volunteers guided newcomers through the collection of records, explaining dates and sequences of events, but everyone's attention inevitably returned to Isaiah. He remained quiet, composed, and unassuming, allowing the photographs and documents to narrate the story without interruption. Richard Bennett continued to uncover additional binders and letters, each new discovery confirming Isaiah's extensive involvement in shaping the community. Residents murmured among themselves, connecting familiar landmarks with Isaiah's role in constructing them. Children's laughter echoed faintly from outside, contrasting the deep realization forming inside the room, as adults who had once taken their surroundings for granted began to perceive the layers of labor and dedication behind the streets they walked daily. The anticipation grew as more residents gathered, eager to witness the recognition that was long overdue. Karen lingered near the edge of the room, finally stepping forward, her expression a mixture of regret and admiration. She approached Isaiah cautiously, feeling the weight of her previous assumptions and realizing that the man she had doubted was the very foundation upon which her neighborhood thrived. A hush fell over the group when Richard pointed to a photograph showing Isaiah at the ribbon-cutting ceremony of the original community center, the image now resonating with historical significance. Residents began discussing amongst themselves, connecting Isaiah's meticulous work with the amenities, streets, and parks they now enjoyed, recognizing that his decades of quiet effort had shaped not only the physical landscape, but also the sense of community that defined Willow Creek Estates. Finally, the planning committee agreed on how to incorporate this newly recognized history into the upcoming anniversary, ensuring that Isaiah Brooks would be celebrated not only for his past contributions, but also for the enduring impact of his work on generations of residents. As the sun began to lower outside, casting long warm rays across the neighborhood, Isaiah stood by the photographs, his presence calm, dignified, and a living testament to the quiet heroism of someone whose labor had shaped the world around him, and whose story was finally being told in full, evoking reflection, respect, and a newfound appreciation from all who bore witness to it. The day of the Willow Creek Estates anniversary arrived with a golden warmth that seemed to highlight the importance of the occasion. Residents gathered early at the clubhouse, the room buzzing with excitement and a quiet reverence for the history now unveiled. Photographs, documents, and maps were arranged meticulously along tables, each telling a piece of the story that had been hidden for decades. Isaiah Brooks entered carrying a small folder of personal records, his steps measured, calm, and unassuming. Conversations hushed as he moved through the room. Richard Bennett greeted him warmly, nodding toward the crowd. Linda stood nearby, coordinating volunteers who were ensuring that every guest had a chance to view the displays. Families, longtime residents, and newcomers alike moved from table to table, marveling at the intricate detail captured in the photographs and the old planning documents. Karen Whitfield arrived shortly afterward, pausing just inside the door. She had watched the unfolding revelations from a distance in the days prior, and now approached with a mixture of apprehension and respect. She observed Isaiah arranging documents on the main table, noting the calm authority in his posture, and the quiet confidence of a man whose contributions had finally been acknowledged. The ceremony began with a brief introduction from Richard Bennett, who highlighted the significance of the historical records and the efforts that had gone into preserving them. He gestured toward Isaiah and spoke clearly, "This man has been a foundation of our community since its earliest days. Today we finally recognize the work, dedication, and care he has invested in making Willow Creek Estates what it is today." A collective murmur spread through the room. Residents turned to study Isaiah, some nodding in appreciation, others blinking back surprise and admiration. The photographs told a story of streets laid, parks designed, pools built, and houses erected, all guided by Isaiah's steady hand and meticulous oversight. Karen stepped forward at last. She extended a hand, her voice soft yet sincere. "Isaiah, I owe you an apology. We never understood fully, and now we see everything you have done for all of us." Isaiah accepted the gesture with quiet dignity, a gentle smile crossing his face. "Thank you," he replied simply, the warmth of acknowledgement resonating without need for embellishment. As the ceremony continued, speeches gave way to moments of quiet reflection. Residents moved among the displays, discussing and pointing out landmarks that Isaiah had helped create, connecting past memories with present understanding. Children played nearby, unaware of the depth of history unfolding within the clubhouse, yet the streets, parks, and playgrounds they enjoyed were all enduring evidence of Isaiah's labor and vision. As the sun lowered in the sky, golden light streamed through the windows, illuminating the photographs, the documents, and the faces of those who had gathered to witness history being corrected. Isaiah stood silently, the weight of recognition settling around him like a gentle acknowledgement of decades-long service. The community had finally begun to see the full story, honoring the quiet heroism of a man whose presence had always been foundational, whose patience and dedication had shaped the world around him, and whose name would now forever be remembered as integral to Willow Creek Estates. The ceremony ended, but very few people seemed eager to leave. As evening settled over Willow Creek Estates, the clubhouse remained filled with quiet conversations and thoughtful reflection. The golden light outside softened into the deep amber glow of sunset, casting long shadows across the sidewalks, the park, and the community pool. Families lingered near the displays. Children chased one another across the lawn. Elderly residents sat together sharing stories they had not thought about in years. For the first time in a very long time, the neighborhood was not simply celebrating where it was. It was remembering how it got there. Near the center of the clubhouse, a new display had been prepared. Beside the photographs and historical records stood a polished bronze plaque mounted on a wooden stand. Residents gathered around it in silence. The inscription was simple. It recognized Isaiah Brooks as one of the foundational builders and field leaders whose dedication helped transform open land into the thriving community, now known as Willow Creek Estates. There were no exaggerated titles. No grand claims, just the truth. Richard Bennett stepped aside after unveiling it, allowing residents to approach. One by one, people paused to read the plaque. Some smiled. Some nodded thoughtfully. Others seemed visibly emotional. The realization that such an important story had remained hidden for so long affected people more deeply than they expected. Karen Whitfield stood several feet away, watching quietly. Earlier that week she had seen Isaiah as a stranger. Now she saw him differently. Not because of a plaque. Not because of the applause. But because she finally understood something she had failed to see before. A person's value is not determined by whether you recognize their face. Sometimes the most important people in a community are the ones whose work becomes so permanent that everyone forgets it was ever built at all. Isaiah remained his usual self throughout the evening. He thanked people for their kindness. He answered questions. He shared a few stories from the early days of construction. Yet he never sought attention. In fact, several times he quietly stepped away from conversations and wandered outside. Near sunset, he found himself standing beside the community pool. The water reflected the colors of the evening sky. Orange, gold, blue. Children laughed somewhere in the distance. A gentle breeze moved through the trees. Isaiah looked across the pool deck and smiled faintly. It was the same place where only days earlier he had been treated as though he did not belong. Now it felt different. Not because the location had changed, because the people had. Behind him, footsteps approached. Isaiah turned and saw Karen. For a moment neither spoke. Then Karen looked toward the pool. "I keep thinking about everything I did not know," she said quietly. Isaiah followed her gaze. "We all have things we do not know." She nodded. "I am glad the truth finally came out." Isaiah smiled gently. "So am I." The two stood there for a moment, watching the evening settle over the neighborhood. No speeches. No dramatic confrontation. No bitterness. Just understanding. As darkness slowly approached, lights flickered on throughout Willow Creek. Porch lights. Street lights. Pathway lamps. Many of them standing exactly where Isaiah had helped place them decades earlier. He took a slow breath and looked across the community he had helped build. The homes. The streets. The trees. The people. For years, the neighborhood remembered the buildings but forgot the builder. Tonight it remembered both. And as the last light of day faded beyond the horizon, Isaiah Brooks quietly turned toward home, carrying no anger from the past, only the quiet warmth of knowing that truth, though delayed, had finally found its place.